Welcome to Overwatch, and welcome to, well, something a little bit different. It seems today that Blizzard have decided to bring up the public test realm, and as a result we have now access to competitive mode, or at least what their intention for competitive mode is. What you're going to see in the background is a match on King's Row, and then I think an annotated, well not annotated, abridged version of a map from Dorado. You'll notice I'm playing supports in both of these. This is because the public test realm is basically American only, so as a result, if you look in the top left corner, you can probably see that I have about 200 ping. That's a little bit annoying. A lot of Europeans are playing, however, so they are getting sort of matched with other Europeans, so everyone basically is playing on 200 ping or 150 ping, and it's a bit crazy at the moment for us poor Euros. Now, the biggest thing, of course, in the PTR right now is, hey, the competitive mode is in the game, but Blizzard have not explained it anywhere at all, and that's very annoying. So let's run through it bit by bit about how it works. If you're familiar with the system in the beta, well, this is a vast improvement, although it's taken a step back in some strange ways, and I'll get to those later. Let's focus on King's Row right now, let's focus on Payload and on the hybrid modes. So as you can probably see in the top, well, in the middle of the screen, you can see a clock, and then you can see meters being displayed. What that basically means is, hey, the system they are using is based on distance that you push the payload and checkpoints. So every single time you get a checkpoint, you get a point. That's actually quite nice, because it means that if you can basically take the first point on King's Row, then you get a point. Then you start pushing the payload and it goes a certain distance. The enemy team has to beat your points and your distance. Now that's all pretty straightforward until you start getting into the situation where either both teams full hold or both teams push all the way to the end, because it is based on distance. If you both teams push all the way to the end, it means you go to a round of sudden death, and sudden death is where, well, my biggest gripe with this system basically comes into effect. So the way sudden death works right now is you basically play a single control point, well, not even a control point, you basically play a single checkpoint on one half. It's basically a coin flip on who is on attack and who is on defense, and then you just play out that single checkpoint. If the attacking team doesn't push to the end of that checkpoint, then they lose. If the defending team doesn't hold out, then they, well, if the defending team holds out, they win. If the defending team doesn't hold out, they lose. And it's really annoying, because what it's basically saying is it's random who wins and loses. And why do I say that? I say that because there is a vast difference, for example, between the first point on King's Row or the first point on Dorado. Let's take the most extreme examples. The first point on Dorado, one of the hardest points to take in Overwatch, compared to the first point in Watchpoint Gibraltar, one of the easiest points. So basically it's completely random. You know, if you are defending on Dorado, you are in a much better position to win than if you are defending on Gibraltar. That's got nothing to do with the team you're playing, that's nothing to do with the skill level of the players, and as a result, it's kind of sad. And I really don't like that sudden death system. I think what they had in beta was a lot better, even though it wasn't great. I think just introduce a tertiary objective, introduce time to it, makes it nice and simple. Because then you have, you know, if you don't make it all the way to the end, well, you know, you're kind of screwed. If you don't, if you do a full hold on both sides, then you can do a sudden death round on the King of the Hill maps like before, just because that's a lot more balanced, a lot more fair. Like, that's sort of the last ditch, and it's not a great situation when you're trying to, I don't know, determine who's better and who is worse when you go to sudden death, and whatever point you end up getting, whatever checkpoint you end up with, well, that's kind of going to screw you over, because, like I said, the points aren't equal. They're not sort of balanced in terms of win rate, especially at the highest level. And the highest level is where the most competitive rigor needs to be. You need to balance around how the highest level players are going to end up doing things, because they're the ones that are going to be topping out your leaderboard, making your leaderboard look good and making it look very valid. Now, this is still a lot better than what was in the beta, at least in terms of the core mechanic, right? I don't mind the idea of using distance as a metric. They've also done a number of UI improvements. For example, you get to see those throughout the matches. Basically, well, when it switches over, it's a lot smoother than it was in beta. You get play of the match at the end, and that's actually fully implemented now, so you get to see, you know, the best play between both halves. Also, if you are confused, you do play both attack and defense on attack and defense maps, and King of the Hill is now a best of 5. Let's talk about King of the Hill very briefly. King of the Hill, you know, considered sort of the second best competitive mode right now. It's definitely not sort of the favorite of the pros, but it's still pretty good. Both teams fairly equal. You just simply play a best of 5 King of the Hill. Map order is random. Of course, you do run through all 3 maps before you start seeing repeats. So basically, you know, it will go 1-2-3, 1-2, for example, or it can go 3-2-1, 3-1. but you won't see a repeat until you've run through all 3 maps the first time around. King of the Hill, nice and straightforward, nice and simple for competitive mode. 2 control points also changed up a little bit. So the way 2 control points work is it's the same point-based system that you're seeing here. Also, that was a very good res by Mercy, and managed to get me on the point in good time. Managed to contest it and deal a lot of damage on Symmetra. Lovely. Like seeing it. Anyway, getting distracted by the game. 2 control points works on the same point-based system, so if you take the first point, you get a point. If you take the second point, you get a point. Whichever team has the most points wins, but, it is based off time taken, so it is a stopwatch system. Now that means that the only time you get sudden death is when both teams manage to do a full hold. Basically, no one takes the first point. Then you get sudden death where basically you play, again, a coin flip on who is attack and defending, and you just played 1 control point, basically. And that's really silly, again, simply because there's a difference between how defensible each control point is. And being honest, on control point maps especially, full holds are not common, so at least on a higher level play, so at least that's going for it, but you're still going to run into problems where you're determining, at lower level play, for example, if both teams are full holding, well, whatever team gets the defensive side has a massive advantage then for the lower level players, and for higher level players, the attacking team has a massive advantage. It's not a fair system for determining who is better and who is worse. You're basically putting it down to a coin flip and then saying, can you finish off the coin flip? You're giving one team a massive advantage for no real reason, and that makes me a bit sad. That shouldn't be in a competitive system. I think they can run with what they've got right now, and I think it would be vastly improved if they go back to the old sudden death system where they do 1 round of King of the Hill. At least that is a lot fairer than what it is now. It's not ideal in my mind, but it's fairer. In my mind, again, you could improve it by just using a stopwatch system on top of the meters push system, thereby eliminating what happens when both teams push all the way to the end. And basically, say if one team pushes to the end and they take 11 minutes, there's just insane amounts of overtime going into it, but they do it in the end and they take 11 minutes to do so. Then the other team pushes in 3 minutes 30, well, then both teams go to sudden death, and then it's determined by a coin flip, and that's really frustrating to me. So I'd still like to see the introduction of stopwatch. I do like the UI improvements, for example. You'll get to see it perhaps on the Dorado map, where you will see, basically you can see how far the other payload has been pushed. So there's like a golden square that you have to try and push your payload into. And that's quite a nice feature in my mind. Now let's talk about the external systems, because I've talked about how it works. Hopefully you guys get how it works. I'll try and put some text summary as well, just to make sure that's nice and clear and everyone kind of knows what's going on right now. How it works otherwise is you play 10 placement maps. You also need to be level 25 or higher just to take part in competitive. That's fair enough. But you also have to, you do the 10 placement 10 placement matches, and then that will give you a rating. Once you have a rating, then based on the other team's rating, and now, well, basically if you won or lost, then your rating will go up and down. It's a very standard sort of ELO MMR system. It's very, very typical, very normal how it lines up. People are also curious about the golden weapon rewards, so if you consistently win, then you will be able to unlock golden weapons to play around with. And they look kind of cool, but I'm not the biggest fan of them. I think they look a little bit tacky, a little bit gaudy, but that's half the appeal, right? Because they're kind of flashy and kind of easy to show off. The way you get those is you earn currency every single time you win. It's not like you earn competitive points, basically. So for every win, you earn a competitive point. And then after that, you build up enough competitive points and you can buy the golden weapons. I think it's like 300 competitive points per weapon, so that's 300 wins. It's basically a reward if you can consistently win, and if you win a lot, then hey, you'll get the golden weapon. It's definitely not based on sort of your ranking and rating, so don't expect that. Also, there are other rewards just for taking part. So when you finish your 10 placement matches, for example, you do get the spray, the Ilios spray that is animated. So that's actually quite nice to see an animated spray sort of get implemented into the game. I mean, ultimately, let me talk about what I want out of a competitive system, right? Let me talk about what I want out of a ladder. I think this ladder that they're going for, based off a matchmaking rating system, is a lot better than what they had before. Definitely the tier system and the progression system was just not good for the long term of the game. I like being matched up against other players, measuring my skill compared to them, being able to say, okay, well, their team is better than ours by 2 points, but we managed to win, so hey, I've got a shitload of points now. That feels very nice to me. I quite like that, and I'm kind of used to seeing that kind of thing in my competitive systems. I don't want a Hearthstone-style system in a competitive FPS game. To me, that just feels very jarring, and you're trying to take competition out of what is essentially a very competitive environment. So I'm glad to see that they're going with that. I just wish that they would avoid systems that aren't functional, if that makes sense, or that feel overly optimistic. Because I appreciate the idea of trying to do sudden death on the same map and trying to make that work, and trying to sort of make, oh, well, attacking and defense is perfectly balanced, and it's a 50% win rate across the average of all players. But when you actually get into the game, that starts to break down, where you see in the lowest levels, defenders will win more. In the highest levels, attackers will win more. And it basically makes it a coin flip at those levels of, well, if you're attacking, then you have an advantage to suddenly win the whole match for no clear reason. Like, you get an advantage based on a coin flip. Now, probabilistically, words, English, I can speak it, that's going to even out over time, right? Like, you're going to see it sort of, I don't know, plateau out where you get advantages and then the enemy team doesn't get an advantage, so ideally that will even out. But in my mind, just do the King of the Hill instead. It's more balanced, it's easier, we've done it before, we've seen how it works, we kind of get how it is. King of the Hill is not perfectly balanced in terms of, the first team attacking generally has a slight advantage, although I'd be curious to see the actual statistics based on, who takes the point first, how often do they actually end up winning, because you can always bring it back. They'll have ultimates up first, but then you'll get ultimates to swing it back, so maybe you can do something off the back of that. But as far as that's concerned, I don't have the data, Blizzard does, maybe they can tell me how that's going to work. But what I definitely don't want is matches being determined by a coin flip at the end of it in the sudden death because, oh, well, it's Dorado and I'm attacking and full holds on Dorado aren't uncommon. Even at high levels, it's easy to defend first point Dorado when you know how to do it. And it's frustrating, right? It's very, very annoying to see a competitive mode that isn't competitively rigorous, and that's what I want. I want the best team to win reliably most frequently. I don't want one team getting an advantage for no clear reason, and it makes me sad when that can possibly happen. Now, I'm not going to lie, I'm also a little bit sad that I'm very on the fence about 2 control points being in competitive mode. I think at the highest level, it's going to be a complete and utter nightmare to make that balance. Basically, anytime you get that mode, you're going to see both teams push towards the end. You're going to have a stopwatch format on it, so hey, it's going to be somewhat competitively rigorous, but it's not going to be fun or satisfying for either team, and so that makes me a bit sad. I don't think Blizzard are ever going to get to the point with 2 control point where it's going to be playable at the highest level, where you're going to be able to use the full 10-minute time period and still be fun for lower level players. So as a result, I think at the highest tier, that's always going to be an issue. Maybe Blizzard need to do a system where at the highest level 2 control points just drops off and just vanishes, because it isn't going to be effective in measuring what team is better than the other. It's going to be effective at measuring, well, what team had the best first push and then can push off the back of that. That's all it's going to be measuring at that level. Now, I will say that I again do prefer this system to the one that we saw in the closed beta originally. The closed beta one, if you aren't familiar, was basically all or nothing. If you won, you had to push all the way to the end to win a point, and then the other team had to do the same. Time was irrelevant, distance was irrelevant, there were no other deciding factors. It was just a straight win or loss, and then you went to sudden death. And sudden death was a single random map of King of the Hill, basically. So that was really frustrating because more often than not, well, let's say again you hold out for 10 minutes, you keep them back, they can't push very quickly, and then you push in 3 minutes, and then they eventually sort of squeeze it in at the last minute, and then you push and you do it in 3 minutes, and then you go to sudden death and they win. That's so unsatisfying, and it's still going to be unsatisfying in this case. Now it's going to happen less because, hey, you're rewarded now for sort of holding out in the middle of the map. And by the way, it was really frustrating, by the way, when, let's say you got all the way past the second checkpoint, you almost got the third checkpoint, and then you do a full defensive hold, and that's treated equal. At least that's gone. Like, I'm very happy that that's gone, and that you will win if you basically don't try and match up to the other team's points. So as you can see from the Dorado map, for example, that should be playing in the background right now, we have a point because we made it to the first checkpoint. So then they, at the very least, have to make it to that first checkpoint, and they have to match the distance that we are pushing the payload. That feels nice. That feels sort of appropriate. I just wish that if both teams push all the way to the end, the time is then taken into account, simply because it then forces less sudden deaths, and sudden death is inherently kind of unreliable as a metric for measuring skill. In my mind, it just isn't reflective of what happened in the match beforehand, so it becomes very difficult to measure, okay, well, this team is clearly better than this team, therefore this team wins and gets everything or all or nothing. I don't know if the matchmaking rating will take into account, well, this map went to sudden death, so maybe teams earn less points, maybe they earn more. It's hard to say. I don't know the full details of the system. Again, Blizzard haven't released full details of the system. Jeff Kaplan, big man himself, the legend himself, Tig Old Biddies, did actually make a big post talking about matchmaking rating and sort of how the troubles for it and the issues that players have in sort of perspective and how that measures up. So that was very interesting to read, but unfortunately he didn't go into depth in terms of how the competitive system is going to actually work and measure people out, other than it will use the matchmaking system based on your rating compared to the other team's ratings, and then adjust you accordingly, similar to what WoW uses, for example, if you're familiar with that. So hey, I'm kind of glad to see like an elo-based system coming into it. It's not perfect, but it's definitely better than what we had before, and hey, I'm curious to see it going forward. Now, I will be playing more on the PTR just to sort of test stuff out. There are a couple of things on the PTR as well that I will very quickly address. Most notably, Widowmaker's voice line when she fires off her ultimate is now broadcast nice and loud and clear across the entire map. Also, I don't believe there is a hero limit on the competitive mode right now. We never actually had a duplicate like in the games that I played, so I don't know for certain, but I'm pretty goddamn sure they haven't put in a hero limit. It will be very unlikely for Blizzard to do so. Judging by how they've just positioned themselves in the past, they don't seem keen on the idea of having a one hero limit, and that's up to them. Like, I leave that in their hands. Right now, I don't think it's the best way to play the game, and I don't think it's the most competitively rigorous. I admire their ambition. I just don't think it's reflective of how the game actually plays, but that's an issue for a whole other video. Trust me, that's a big topic to go into. Still, I have been Josh, as one voice amongst many. This has been a first look at competitive, how it works. Hopefully you guys understand a little bit more about how the system is shaping up. Very curious to get you guys' feedback. If you've tried the PTR, if you haven't tried the PTR, I do recommend going onto it, giving it a bash, giving Blizzard your feedback, because that's what they want right now. That's what I'm doing right now. And let me just actually do it in bullet points, just so it's nice and clear. I like the new system for 2 control points. I like that it's stopwatch. I do like the new system for Payload as well. I just wish that it did actually take into account time when both teams push all the way to the end. I'm fine with distance being the main metric for most of the game, but if both teams push all the way to the end, I do not want it to go to a sudden death when one team might have pushed much faster than the other, for example. That's just unsatisfying to me. Sudden death should be a last resort that isn't going to happen very often. Like Jeff said, I think Jeff even himself doesn't like sudden death, so if you can minimize that through ways of doing it in the actual match itself, that's good to me. And then finally, King of the Hill. King of the Hill is fine as it is. It's just very straightforward. It plays out just exactly how you'd expect. So that's kind of nice. The current sudden death system is complete arse and needs to be changed. Like, you are not going to find support for that in the pro community at all, simply because it is so variable on what checkpoint is being used, what map you're playing, who gets attack, who gets defense. It gives one team a massive unfair advantage, isn't balanced at all, isn't fair at all, and isn't going to give you good results in the matchmaking system. It basically means one team is much more likely to win than the other based on a coin flip, and that's just not fair. That's not ideal in a competitive system where you're trying to measure what team is better than the other. You just can't give one an arbitrary advantage. So get that out. If you need to replace it with something in the short term, then do it with the King of the Hill system. That's a lot fairer. It's not perfect in itself, but it is better. Those are my thoughts on the current matchmaking system. Those are my thoughts on how it's shaping up so far. I'm curious to see how it evolves. Hopefully Blizzard will take some of this feedback to heart. But yeah, it's definitely better than it was. I'm kind of happy with the direction it's going. It just needs a couple of steps further. Toodles.